Superheroes and the comics that they came from have been around for about 90 years now, and it's kind of hard to believe that they have stuck around for this long. But in recent years, it has seemed that comics have had a falling out of sorts, with their constant reboots, expensive products, and the global pandemic. It's no wonder that a lot of readers have dropped comics altogether. But I believe that comics still have a chance to change in order to save their future. Now, before I get started, I would like to say that all the articles I got my information from will be linked in the description. First, let's go back to 2018, which was one of the comic book industry's biggest years, with the yearly sales grossing over $1.1 billion. Now, with huge superhero movies such as Avengers Infinity War and Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse also released in 2018, you may be thinking that the majority of the sales probably came from superhero comics, published by DC and Marvel. But, shockingly, that wasn't the case. It turns out that the majority of the sales that year came from children's graphic novels and not superhero comic books. Now, how come children's graphic novels are outselling superhero comics? This may be because comic publishers, such as DC and Marvel, have found a new way to make money off of their intellectual properties, such as starting movie franchises, like the MCU, for example. Because of this, the stories in the comics that they publish have started to become bland and stale, as the publishers have shifted their focus towards the movies instead of their comic books. This has caused a lack of interest in their monthly issues. But poor sales and a lack of interest isn't the only problem with this industry. Probably the biggest problem comes from Diamond Distributors and the monopoly they have on comic distribution. This all started in the 1970s when comic book publishers wanted to move selling their comics from retail stores and newspaper stands to specialty comic book shops and the direct market. But in order to do this, comic book publishers had to start distributing their comics through Diamond Distributors. And since Diamond Distributors were the only one distributing comic books, they made comic book shops order their shipments in advance. Because of this, comic book shop owners would have to determine which series would sell well and which would not. And if they decided on a series that did not sell well, Diamond Distributors had a no refund policy. This would leave comic book shops with a back stock of those series and a loss of profits. Also, since Diamond Distributors is the only company distributing comics, this has caused severe damage to the comic book industry during the global pandemic, since Diamond Distributors closed down their shipments, which meant that comic book shops could no longer get their titles that they ordered months in advance. Because of this, comic book publishers have put their current series titles on a hiatus, with their writers not knowing when they can continue their stories. But this might actually have a silver lining, as a couple months after Diamond shut down, DC has announced that they are leaving Diamond Distributors in order to sell during the pandemic. Along with this, DC has announced that they will no longer be selling monthly issues. Instead, they will be focusing on trade paperback and digital sales. I think this might be a good change for the comic book industry, as most of DC and Marvel's money comes from trade paperback and digital sales. Also, since they canceled their monthly issues, this might give writers a better chance to flesh out their stories with a more cinematic feel, instead of a long-going series that has multiple authors. This may also allow the authors to make their stories less convoluted without rebooting their properties to entice new readers. In fact, comic book publishers may be able to take a couple notes from Japanese manga. When it comes to manga, it is very easy for a new reader to jump in, as titles usually have a definitive beginning and an end without decades of continuity for a reader to catch up on. This means if you would want to start a new series of manga, you would just have to start at volume 1, and also not have to read multiple spin-offs to understand the whole story. So, in the end, I think that if more comic book publishers don't leave Diamond Distributors and learn more from manga, we might